The morning sun peeked through the cafe windows, casting warm shadows across the freshly wiped tables. Mai moved with the familiar rhythm of the breakfast rush, her comfortable shoes squeaking slightly against the tile floor as she navigated between tables. The Morning Star Cafe had been her second home for the past 5 years, though it wasn't exactly where she had pictured herself when she first moved to the city with stars in her eyes and a guitar strapped to her back. "Order up," called out Uncle Lee from the kitchen window, his cheerful voice cutting through the morning buzz. May grabbed the plates of steaming pancakes and eggs, expertly balancing them on her forearm. As she served an elderly couple their breakfast, she caught herself humming the melody of a song she'd written years ago, back when her evenings were spent in small coffee shops with her guitar rather than counting tips and soaking her tired feet. The regulars had grown familiar with her quiet songs. Mrs. Kumar, who came in every morning for her chai tea, often told Mai that her humming made the cafe feel like home. Even grumpy Mr. Thompson, who insisted his coffee needed to be exactly 165 degrees, would tap his foot along when she got lost in a tune while refilling his cup. Between refills and taking orders, Mai watched the people around her, each carrying their own stories. There was the young student frantically typing on her laptop, probably working on a last-minute assignment. The businessman in the corner, who always loosened his tie before diving into his French toast. The retired teacher who spent hours doing crossword puzzles and occasionally asked Mai for help with the music clues. During slower moments, she'd catch her reflection in the chrome of the coffee machines. At 28, she still had the same spark in her eyes, though perhaps a bit more wisdom around the edges. Her mother's voice echoed in her head. "A stable job is important, but don't let it steal your song." Mai had promised herself the waitressing gig would be temporary, just until she found her footing in the music scene. But days turned into months, and months into years. Yet even as she memorized orders and calculated bills, melodies continued to dance in her head. She'd scribble lyrics on order pad corners during her breaks, turning customer stories into verses. The rhythmic clinking of cups and plates became her background beat, the whirring of the coffee grinder her bass line. The cafe had its own music, she realized, though it wasn't quite the symphony she dreamed of creating. The morning rush began to slow, and Mai started her usual routine of wiping down tables and restocking sugars. As she worked, she let herself get lost in one of her original songs, her voice barely above a whisper. It was a habit she developed to make the mundane tasks more enjoyable, transforming the daily grind into something a little more magical. Little did she know that this ordinary Tuesday was about to become anything but routine. Sometimes life's biggest changes happen on the most normal of days, when you're just going through the motions, waiting for your real life to begin. For Mai, that moment was about to arrive with the soft chime of the cafe door's bell and a customer who would change everything. The afternoon lull had settled over the cafe like a comfortable blanket. Most of the lunch crowd had cleared out, leaving behind coffee cups and crumpled napkins, quiet evidence of the earlier rush. Mai moved between the tables with her cleaning cloth, enjoying the peaceful moment. These were the times when she felt most at ease, when she could let her guard down just a little. The cafe radio had been playing the same top 40 hits all day, and without really thinking about it, Mai switched it off. In the relative quiet, she began to sing softly to herself, one of her own songs, something she'd written late one night after a particularly long shift. It was about chasing dreams and time slipping through fingers like grains of sugar from the packets she restocked every evening. Lost in the melody, she didn't notice how her voice gradually grew stronger, more confident. The words flowed naturally, telling stories of midnight bus rides home, of city lights that looked like fallen stars, of hope that refused to fade even when reality tried its best to dim it. Her voice carried the weight of every delayed dream and every "maybe tomorrow" she'd ever told herself. At the corner table, partially hidden behind a large potted plant, sat a woman Mai hadn't paid much attention to before. She'd ordered a cappuccino and had been typing on her laptop for the past hour, just another faceless customer in a sea of everyday faces. But now, the woman's fingers had stopped moving across her keyboard. Her eyes were fixed on me, watching with an intensity that would have made Mai nervous if she'd noticed it. The song came to its natural end, and reality slowly crept back in. Mai became aware of the sudden silence in the cafe, save for the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of Uncle Lee chopping vegetables in the kitchen. Then, unexpectedly, a soft clapping sound broke through the quiet. The woman at the corner table was applauding, a warm smile spreading across her face. Mai felt her cheeks flush red. She hadn't realized anyone was listening. She quickly grabbed her cleaning supplies, ready to retreat to the safety of the kitchen, but the woman's voice stopped her. "Wait," she called out, her tone gentle but commanding. "That song, did you write it?" Mai turned slowly, clutching her cleaning cloth like a shield. "Yes," she admitted, wondering if she was about to get in trouble for turning off the radio. "I'm sorry if it bothered you. I usually keep it down." The woman shook her head, closing her laptop. "Bothered? No, quite the opposite." She gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Would you mind sitting for a moment? My name is Lynn, and I work with aspiring musicians." Mai hesitated, glancing at the clock. It was her break time anyway, and something about Lynn's genuine interest made her curious. She slid into the chair, still gripping her cloth, still slightly embarrassed, but also feeling a tiny spark of something she hadn't felt in a while, possibility. "Tell me," Lynn said, pushing her now cold cappuccino aside, "how long have you been writing songs?" The question opened a floodgate. Before Mai knew it, she was telling Lynn about the guitar gathering dust under her bed, about the notebooks filled with lyrics, about the dreams she'd put on hold, but never quite abandoned. Lynn listened intently, occasionally nodding, her eyes bright with what looked like recognition, as if she'd heard this story before, as if she'd understood exactly what Mai was saying even when the words came out jumbled and unsure. Outside the cafe windows, the city continued its usual afternoon dance of traffic and hurrying pedestrians. But inside, at that corner table, time seemed to slow down. Sometimes the biggest moments in life come disguised as ordinary conversations on ordinary days. For Mai, sitting across from Lynn in her coffee-stained apron, this was one of those moments, though she didn't know it yet. The evening shift was winding down, and Mai's feet ached from the long day of serving customers. Her conversation with Lynn kept replaying in her mind as she went through the closing routine, wiping down tables, counting her tips, and helping Uncle Lee stack the clean dishes. The whole afternoon felt like a dream, the kind that leaves you wondering if it really happened. As she hung up her apron, Lynn's business card seemed to burn a hole in her pocket. She'd looked at it at least a dozen times since their talk, running her thumb over the embossed letters. Lynn Zhang, vocal coach and talent development. The card also listed an address for a studio just 3 blocks from the cafe. Uncle Lee noticed her distraction as she helped him close up. "Something on your mind?" he asked, his weathered face creasing with concern. "You've wiped that same table 3 times now." Mai smiled sheepishly and told him about Lynn's unexpected offer. Free vocal coaching in exchange for helping her develop new teaching techniques. "She says my voice has something unique," Mai explained, still not quite believing it herself. "But I don't know. It seems too good to be true." Uncle Lee leaned against the counter, his usual practical expression softening. "You know," he said, "when I first opened this cafe, everyone told me I was crazy. The rent was too high, the competition too fierce. But sometimes the crazy chances are the ones worth taking." Outside, the city lights were coming on, painting the street in soft yellows and blues. Mai gathered her things, her mind still spinning with possibilities. Lynn's words echoed in her head. Raw talent is rare, but someone who can convey real emotion through their voice, that's even rarer. The next morning, Mai found herself standing outside Lynn's studio half an hour before their scheduled meeting. The building was nothing fancy, just another brick structure squeezed between a laundromat and a convenience store. Through the window, she could see a piano and some recording equipment. Her hand trembled slightly as she pushed open the door. A small bell chimed, reminding her of the cafe, and somehow that familiar sound gave her courage. Lynn looked up from her desk and smiled, gesturing for May to join her. "Before we start," Lynn said, pulling out a folder, "I want to be completely honest with you. I'm working on a new teaching method, something that combines traditional vocal training with emotional expression. Most of my students come from formal music backgrounds, but that's not what I'm looking for right now." She spread out some papers on her desk, lesson plans, schedules, and what looked like research notes. "I need someone who sings from life experience, not just technique. When you sang in the cafe yesterday, I heard something genuine. That's what I want to work with." Mai listened carefully, her heart beating faster with each word. The practical part of her brain was already calculating how she could fit practice sessions around her cafe schedule, whether she could afford to cut back on shifts if needed, what her parents would say. "I know it's a lot to consider," Lynn continued, seeming to read Mei's thoughts. "And I want you to understand, this isn't a shortcut to fame or fortune. It's hard work, and there's no guarantee where it will lead. But if you're willing to commit to this, really commit, I believe we could create something special." The morning sun streamed through the studio window, catching dust motes in its beam. In that light, Mai could see the passion in Lynn's eyes, the same kind she used to see in her own reflection years ago. The offer felt real now, sitting in the small studio with its worn carpet and carefully arranged musical instruments. "Can I think about it?" Mai asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lynn nodded, understanding in her expression. "Take the weekend. But remember, sometimes thinking too much is just another way of saying no to opportunity. Sometimes you have to listen to your heart's melody instead of your mind's doubts." Walking back to her apartment that morning, Mai felt different. The city's usual chaos seemed to move in rhythm with her thoughts, like a complicated song waiting to be understood. She had a decision to make, one that could change everything or lead nowhere. But for the first time in years, she felt the flutter of real possibility in her chest, like a bird testing its wings after a long winter. The alarm buzzed at 5 a.m., and Mei's hand reached out automatically to silence it. Her throat felt raw from last night's vocal exercises, but she couldn't help smiling, the kind of tired smile that comes from chasing a dream. 3 months had passed since she'd accepted Lynn's offer, and now her life moved to 2 different rhythms: the familiar tempo of the cafe and the exciting beat of her music training. The morning shift started as usual, with Mai tying her apron and helping Uncle Lee prep for the breakfast rush. But everything felt different now. Each movement had a melody to it, each interaction was colored by what she'd learned in her evening sessions with Lynn. Even the way she carried plates had changed. Lynn had taught her about posture, about breathing from her diaphragm, about finding rhythm in everyday moments. "Your coffee's actually better since you started singing properly," Mr. Thompson commented that morning, surprising Mai with a rare smile. "It's like you put music in the cup somehow." She laughed, but he had a point. Everything she did now had a touch of music to it, as if her rediscovered passion was spilling over into every corner of her life. The real challenge came in the afternoons. As soon as her shift ended, Mai would rush to Lynn's studio, often still smelling of coffee and syrup. Lynn never minded. She'd just hand Mai a glass of water and dive straight into their work. Some days they focused on breathing techniques, other days on emotional expression. Lynn's teaching method was unlike anything Mai had expected. "Music isn't just about hitting the right notes," Lynn would say, watching Mai practice. "It's about telling your truth. When you serve coffee, you're not just moving cups around. You're part of people's daily stories. Bring that understanding into your singing." The evening would find Mai in her tiny apartment, surrounded by paper cups of honey tea, practicing scales while her neighbor's cat watched curiously through the window. Her voice would mix with the city sounds, distant sirens, the rumble of trains, the hum of traffic. Sometimes she'd catch herself harmonizing with these urban rhythms, turning the city's chaos into her own personal symphony. But the double life was taking its toll. Dark circles appeared under her eyes, and she started keeping an extra uniform at the cafe because sometimes she forgot to do laundry. Her tip jar held less money these days. Voice lessons meant fewer shifts, and fewer shifts meant tighter budgets. She learned to stretch her groceries, to find creative ways to make instant noodles feel like proper meals. One particularly exhausting Tuesday, Mi almost dropped an entire tray of dishes. The clash of plates against each other made her jump, though thankfully nothing broke. Her coworker, Jen, caught her arm, steadying her. "You okay?" Jen asked, concern evident in her voice. "You've been looking pretty worn out lately." May nodded, but her hands were shaking slightly. "I'm fine," she said, managing a smile. "Just trying to balance everything." Later that day, during her break, Mai found herself in the back alley behind the cafe, sitting on an upturned milk crate. She pulled out her phone and played back a recording from her latest session with Lynn. Her voice sounded different now, stronger, more confident, but also more vulnerable somehow. She could hear the late nights and early mornings in it, the dreams and doubts all mixed together. Uncle Lee found her there, still listening to the recording. Without a word, he handed her a fresh cup of coffee and sat down on another crate. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the music together. "You know," he said finally, "the most beautiful songs are often the ones that cost us something to sing." He patted her shoulder gently. "Just don't forget to breathe between the verses, okay?" May nodded, grateful for his understanding. As she sipped her coffee, a new melody began forming in her mind. A song about living between two worlds, about the beauty and exhaustion of following a dream while keeping your feet firmly planted in reality. Maybe this, too, would find its way into her music someday. The text message from Lynn arrived during the busiest lunch rush the cafe had seen in months. Mai felt her phone vibrate in her apron pocket as she balanced 3 plates of steaming noodles. She couldn't check it until an hour later, when she finally had a moment to breathe. When she did, her heart nearly stopped. Big opportunity. Local music festival needs an opening act. Next Saturday afternoon. Organizer loved your demo recording. Call me ASAP. Her hands trembled as she read the message again. Next Saturday. The same Saturday as the cafe's annual Cherry Blossom Festival, their biggest event of the year. Uncle Lee had been planning it for months, ordering special ingredients, designing a new menu. Everyone was scheduled to work extra hours that day. The back alley became her refuge again as she called Lynn, speaking in hushed tones between delivery truck arrivals. The festival wasn't just any show. It was a proper outdoor event with real sound equipment, a decent-sized crowd, and most importantly, music industry people in attendance. "This could be your moment," Lynn said, her voice crackling through the phone. "But you need to decide quickly. They need an answer by tomorrow morning." That evening, after her shift, Mai sat cross-legged on her tiny apartment floor, her laptop open to a video call with her younger sister back home. The familiar face on the screen listened patiently as Mai poured out her confusion. "I can't just abandon Uncle Lee and everyone during the busiest day of the year," Mai explained, running her fingers through her hair. "They depend on me. And this job, it's kept me going all these years." Her sister's voice came through clearly despite the distance. "Remember when I wanted to quit art school because I felt guilty about Mom and Dad paying the tuition? You told me sometimes we have to be brave enough to accept support from people who believe in us. Maybe it's time to take your own advice." The night grew later, and Mai found herself walking the quiet streets of her neighborhood, past closed shops and dimly lit windows. The weight of the decision pressed down on her shoulders like a heavy coat. The cafe wasn't just a job. It was family, security, the foundation she'd built her life on in this city. But the music, The music was the heartbeat she'd been trying to follow her entire life. Back in her apartment, she pulled out her old guitar from under the bed. Dust had gathered on its case, but the strings still felt familiar under her fingers. She started playing softly, mindful of her neighbors, and found herself working through a new song. One about standing at crossroads, about the courage it takes to disappoint people you love for the sake of a dream. Around midnight, her phone lit up with a message from Uncle Lee. "Can't sleep. Saw your kitchen light on from the street. Come down for some tea if you want." 15 minutes later, Mai sat at one of the cafe's empty tables, watching Uncle Lee prepare tea the traditional way, just like he did every morning before opening. The familiar scent of jasmine filled the quiet space. "You know," he said, setting a cup in front of her, "before this was a cafe, I wanted it to be a traditional Chinese restaurant. My father was so angry when I changed the plan. He didn't speak to me for months." He smiled at the memory. But sometimes the hardest choices lead us where we need to go. Mai wrapped her hands around the warm cup, letting his words sink in. "The Cherry Blossom Festival," she started, but her voice caught. "Will still happen," he finished for her. "Maybe not exactly as planned, but we adapt. That's what family does." He reached across the table and patted her hand. "Dreams don't come knocking every day, but customers always come back for good coffee." As she walked home in the early hours of the morning, the city felt different, like it was holding its breath, waiting for her decision. The street lamps cast long shadows that danced with her footsteps, and somewhere in the distance, a street musician played a late-night melody that seemed to echo her thoughts. Tomorrow, she would have to give both Lin and Uncle Lee her answer. Tomorrow, she would have to be brave enough to either hold onto what was safe or leap into the unknown. But for now, in this quiet moment between yesterday and tomorrow, May let herself feel both the fear and the excitement, knowing that either way, this was part of her story. Morning light streamed through the cafe windows as Mai stood before Uncle Lee, her hands clasped tightly together. The words tumbled out of her mouth, about the festival, the opportunity, her dreams. She had rehearsed this speech all night, but now it came out messy and real, full of pauses and half-finished sentences. Uncle Lee listened quietly, his expression unreadable. When she finally stopped talking, the silence felt heavy enough to touch. Then, unexpectedly, he started laughing. A warm, genuine laugh that made the tension melt away like sugar in hot tea. Finally, he said, wiping tears from his eyes, "I was wondering when you'd find the courage to chase your music again." He disappeared into his office and returned with an old, worn photo album. Inside was a yellowed newspaper clipping showing a much younger version of himself holding a bass guitar, playing in what looked like a smoky club. "You think all I know is cooking and running a cafe." He grinned, pointing at the photo. "I played jazz for 10 years before opening this place. Music never really leaves you. It just waits for the right moment to sing again." That afternoon, something shifted in the cafe's atmosphere. As Mai told her coworkers about the upcoming performance, instead of disappointment, she found enthusiasm. Jen offered to take extra shifts. The new part-timer, who rarely spoke, revealed he had a friend who did sound engineering and could help her practice with proper equipment. The cafe transformed after closing hours. Uncle Lee pushed the tables against the walls, creating a makeshift practice space. He pulled out his old bass guitar from the storage room, dust covering its case. "It's been waiting for a moment like this," he said, carefully tuning the strings. Every night that week, after the last customer left, the cafe came alive with music. Uncle Lee's bass lines wove perfectly through Mi's songs, adding depth she never knew they needed. Other staff members stayed late to listen and offer encouragement. Even Mr. Thompson, their grumpiest regular, started timing his evening coffee runs to coincide with their practice sessions. The cafe's security cameras caught their late-night rehearsals. Mai standing among the empty tables, singing her heart out while Uncle Lee played bass, coffee machines gleaming in the background like a silent audience. These moments felt magical, like the cafe itself was helping her prepare for what lay ahead. Lynn visited during one of these practice sessions, bringing her recording equipment. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, taking in the scene, the improvised stage area, the staff members scattered around like an intimate audience, the way everyone had come together to support one dream. "This," she said, gesturing around the cafe, "this is what I've been trying to teach you about. Music isn't just about the perfect note or the right technique. It's about community, about people coming together, about turning ordinary spaces into something extraordinary." The week flew by in a blur of practice sessions, voice exercises, and regular cafe shifts. Me's muscles ached from standing all day and practicing all night, but it was a good kind of tired, the kind that comes from moving forward, from finally doing what you're meant to do. Friday night, their last practice session, turned into an impromptu mini-concert. Regular customers who had heard about Me's upcoming performance showed up after closing. Someone brought cookies, another brought flowers. The cafe's small space was packed with familiar faces, all there to support her final rehearsal. As Mai sang her last song of the night, she looked around at the crowd of people who had become her family. Uncle Lee with his bass guitar, her coworkers recording on their phones, customers who had heard her humming for years now finally hearing her true voice. In that moment, she realized that this wasn't just her leap of faith. They were all taking it with her, believing in her dream as if it were their own. Later, helping to put the tables back in place, Mai found a small package on the counter. Inside was a cafe apron, but not her usual one. This one had musical notes embroidered along the edges, and a small note pinned to it read, "For tomorrow, so you remember where you started and who's cheering you on. Love, your cafe family." The music festival grounds buzzed with afternoon energy. Sound checks echoed across the park, mixing with the excited chatter of early arrivals. Backstage, Mai stood in her special apron, running her fingers over the embroidered musical notes while Lynn helped her adjust a microphone pack. "Nervous?" Lynn asked, though she already knew the answer. Mai nodded, watching the crowd grow through a gap in the stage curtain. She spotted familiar faces filing in. There was Mr. Thompson, looking unusually cheerful in a casual shirt instead of his usual business suit. Jen had organized a whole section of cafe regulars, each wearing Morning Star Cafe t-shirts they'd had specially made for the occasion. Uncle Lee appeared backstage, his bass guitar slung over his shoulder. He'd insisted on accompanying her for 2 songs, and the festival organizers had agreed after hearing them practice. "Ready?" he asked, giving her shoulder a gentle squeeze. "Remember, just like in the cafe, sing your story, and the rest will follow." The stage manager's voice crackled through their earpieces. 5 minutes. Mai took a deep breath, remembering all those moments that had led to this one. The endless coffee orders, the late-night practice sessions, the quiet mornings humming while setting up tables. Each memory felt like a note in the song she was about to sing. As she stepped onto the stage, the setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. The crowd wasn't massive. This was just an opening slot, after all, but to Mai, it felt perfect. These weren't just anonymous faces. She saw her community, her support system, her chosen family. The first notes of her guitar filled the air, and Mai began to sing. The song was one she'd written about the cafe, about dreams living in ordinary moments, about finding magic in morning routines and courage in cups of coffee. When Uncle Lee joined in with his bass for the second song, their music together told the story of 2 generations of dreamers, of different paths leading to the same truth, that it's never too late to let your heart sing. From the stage, she could see Mrs. Kumar wiping tears from her eyes, could hear her coworkers cheering between verses. Even the festival staff had stopped their busy work to listen. In that moment, Mai realized she wasn't just performing. She was sharing pieces of all their lives, woven together in melody and verse. The final song was one she'd finished just the night before, inspired by her journey. As she sang about transformation and trust, about leaping and being caught by unexpected hands, her voice carried all the strength she'd found along the way. The applause that followed wasn't just for her performance. It was a celebration of everyone who had helped her reach this moment. Backstage after the show, Lynn hugged her tightly. "This is just the beginning," she whispered. Several people from the festival approached with business cards and promising words about future opportunities. But the sweetest moment came when a young waitress from another cafe asked shyly for advice about her own hidden dreams. The Cherry Blossom Festival at the Morning Star Cafe had gone on without her, but her coworkers had live-streamed her performance on a tablet propped up near the counter. Customers had watched between bites of special festival dishes, proving that sometimes life finds ways to bring everything together. Weeks later, Mai still worked morning shifts at the cafe, but now she also taught afternoon vocal lessons in Lynn's studio. Her tip jar shared space with a jar for song requests, and she'd learned to blend both her worlds into something uniquely her own. Some days, she helped aspiring singers find their voice. Other days, she helped tired office workers find their perfect cup of coffee. Both felt equally meaningful. The cafe had changed too. Tuesday nights became open mic nights, with Uncle Lee's bass guitar a regular feature. The Morning Star transformed into a place where other dreamers could take their first steps, just as Mai had. Mr. Thompson even surprised everyone by performing an old jazz standard one evening, proving that everyone had hidden melodies waiting to be shared. One quiet morning, as Mai set up tables before opening, she caught herself humming a new tune. The coffee machines provided their usual background rhythm, and sunrise painted the walls in familiar shades of gold. But now these everyday moments felt different, not because they had changed, but because she had learned to hear the music in them. She smiled, remembering something Lynn had told her after the festival. Sometimes the bravest thing isn't leaving your old life behind. It's finding ways to make it sing in harmony with your dreams.